I watched that 4-part story, so you don't have to. We're gonna name her Truth. She's here to tell us the story of her and her parents and everything that they went through. So her parents and her whole family is actually from Ghana, and they migrated to London back in the 80s. She didn't really go into why her parents initially immigrated. She showed us beautiful photos of her parents back in the 80s in Ghana, and she told us how they fell in love instantly. She said certain things happened in Ghana for her parents to have the need to leave. And so when her mother's sister Lulu invited them to come and stay with her in the UK, of course they accepted. They did the necessary paperwork and they moved out to the UK. When they got there, they did all the touristy things. They went to see Buckingham Palace, Central London, all of that. We're gonna call Truth's mom Ruth, and we're gonna call Truth's dad Ray. So over the next year, Ray and Ruth got used to living in London, and eventually Lulu actually got into a pretty serious relationship and her partner moved in. So with the 4 of them living together, the space kind of felt crammed. At the time, Ruth actually had 2 sisters that were living in London. So they were living with Lulu, but she also had her other sister who we're gonna name Lydia. So she goes to Lydia and she says, hey, is there any way that we can live with you? You only have you and your daughter living there. Is it possible? And Lydia's like, yeah, of course, come on over. So both Ray and Lou move in with Lydia. And so they're living together, but now both Ray and Ruth are both ready to like work and make their own way and, you know, build a life for themselves in the UK. So when they went to go tell Lydia like, hey, we're actually ready to get a job, she laughed in their face and said, do you know what it takes to work in the UK? You guys don't even have paperwork. You don't have the status necessary to be able to work. And so this was something that was very common back in the 80s. It was to get a fake ID. So they used real names. Ray used Ruth's older brother's name, and then Ruth used her brother's wife's name. Their plan worked. They both got jobs as cleaners and they both started working very hard and saving up money. However, this is where hostility and jealousy started brewing within Lydia. She started to see that, you know, both Ruth and Ray were working really hard to buy a property, to move out of her house, and instead of being like proud of them and being like, hey, go ahead, do your thing, she actually started getting really jealous of them. Mind you, Ray would give Lydia money anytime he had the chance to, paying bills here and there. He would, you know, fill up the groceries. He would do what he can, but this only actually made Lydia even more upset. It got to a point where Ruth would try to talk to her sister Lydia, and Lydia would just straight up ignore her. She wouldn't say anything, or she would start like little arguments over nothing with them. Eventually, Ray was able to secure a job as an underground train driver, which paid substantially more than what he was getting as a cleaner. One day when Ray came home from work, he saw that things in the house was actually moved around a little bit. Like his stuff was snooped through, letters were moved around. Just, he could tell that, you know, Lydia wanted them to know that she was looking at their paycheck stubs, letters that were being sent out. So this obviously made them uncomfortable, but they didn't care. They had saved enough money at that point and they bought their very first property in South London. When they sat down Lydia to tell her, hey, we bought a property, we're moving out, instead of being like, hey, congratulations, I'm so happy for you, she's actually very upset. She just went off on them, but they didn't care. They packed up their things, they moved out, and shortly after that, they started trying to build a family. Unfortunately, Ruth did experience 2 miscarriages, but on her 3rd pregnancy, she got pregnant with Truth. So now they're going through her pregnancy. On her 3rd trimester, it was a normal day. They were just sitting in the house. It was Ruth and Ray, and all of a sudden they heard a loud knocking on the door, and they're like, what the heck? They weren't expecting anybody at that time. So the dad gets up, and he's pretty scared at this point. He opens up the door, and as soon as he goes to open the door gets burst in, and the cops run in, and they're like, are you such and such? Are you such and such? And the dad's like, what's going on? The police are telling him, you're under arrest for using false identification to obtain this property. We're taking you to jail. They put the dad in handcuffs. He's trying to explain to them, trying to work it out, saying like, hey, like maybe there's a misunderstanding. They're like, absolutely not. They put her mom, who's in her 3rd trimester of pregnancy, in handcuffs as well, and her parents both get arrested and sent to jail. For 3 weeks, her mom sat in prison, and then for 6 weeks, her dad sat in prison. While they were both in prison, Ray and Ruth communicated through letters, and they obtained a lawyer, and it was through the lawyer that they actually got information that the person that gave their very first witness statement about them committing fraud and using false identity was actually Lydia. When Ray found out, he immediately wrote Ruth and told her everything, and they were both shocked to find out that this was all over jealousy about them buying a house. Not only had Lydia gone and written a statement to the police, but she had actually gotten a bunch of other people to do the same thing and kind of created like a ring of betrayal against both Ray and Ruth. This obviously broke their hearts immensely. It weighed heavy on both of their mental health. When her mom was finally released from prison, she was just about to give birth. birth. But unfortunately, their property had been taken away by the government and she had nowhere to go. So she went on the bus and she just kept riding it to the last end. At the time, her mom had no one to call, nowhere to go. It was winter, it was freezing, she didn't know what to do. And so she just kept riding the bus until she started to feel pain and contraction. So she decided to go to the hospital. When she got to the hospital and they checked her out, her vitals were through the roof. They went ahead and admitted her in, and she had an emergency C-section 2 days later, and that's when Truth was born. Ruth ended up staying in the hospital with her baby for the next week. When her and the baby were discharged from the hospital, she still had nowhere to go. And so she still had the keys to the old property. And even though they had taken it away, she had nowhere else to go. So she went back to the old property. And no electricity, it had no gas. She went inside, and because she wasn't eating a lot, she didn't have a lot of breast milk to produce for the baby. And she didn't have a lot of money. So she ended up going and getting what they used to call like a crisis loan. And they gave her 10 pounds. And she had to make that 10 pounds last a long time. Now, formula at the time was really expensive, so her mom couldn't afford that. So unfortunately, even though Truth was a newborn at the time, Ruth's only option was to get baby food and to feed her newborn that. And on top of that, because it was so cold in the house, it was also cold baby food that she was forced to feed her newborn baby. Ruth was really going through it. She really didn't know what she was going to do next. And one day she put her baby in a sling and she just left. She started walking, she got back on the bus, and she just kept riding it to the last stop over and over again. And it just became overwhelming. She got off the bus and she said she started walking towards a busy street, and it wasn't until a woman across the way saw what Ruth was doing, and she ran to her and she stopped her. And Ruth had nobody to talk to. She broke down at that point and she just told the woman everything. The woman felt so bad. She's like, please let me get you a bed and breakfast for the day. And after that, the woman helped her, establish emergency housing, and then from then, take care of herself. But she said that woman was so kind to her. Truth's mom described the emergency accommodations as very scary and very lonely, and she just didn't know what to do. She felt so low at the time. Fortunately, Ray's lawyer found a way to communicate with Ruth and get her back in contact with Ray, and so they were able to talk to each other again. Shortly after that, Ray was released from prison and he was able to join Truth and Ruth at the emergency housing. Unfortunately, signified that they were back at square one. The house was taken, they were in this situation, and they didn't really know what to do, but they knew they were going to rebuild their lives. This also signified the beginning of her father's deep-rooted trust issues with people. Soon after being in the emergency housing, they were able to go into temporary housing. It wasn't until they got to their second temporary housing that Ruth gave birth to her second child, Truth's younger brother, who we're going to name Harold. So now it's the four of them, and eventually they were able to establish permanent housing and slowly but surely rebuild their lives back. It was also at this point that her parents were granted indefinite stay and were able to stay in the UK as well. At this point, Truth is about 11 or 12 years old. Her parents at this point decide, we're done with this. We're only going to focus on positivity, love, happiness. Everything that was in the past is in the past. Her dad decides to pull himself up by his bootstraps. He goes back to school. He becomes a mental health nurse. He starts working really hard. He actually even gets to the point that he starts sending money back to Ghana. He built him and his family a beautiful 5-bedroom bungalow. He also built Ruth's family house for them as well. And of course, this news travels back to Lydia and it enrages her. It's around 2008 now, and unfortunately, Ruth was diagnosed with end-stage kidney failure, and she had to start going to dialysis 3 times a week for 4 hours. Obviously, this was completely draining to her, but her husband, Ray, stood by her through the entire thing. Harold was only 7 at the time, so he couldn't go anywhere. He had to sit there and watch his mom go in and out of the hospital. Truth was a little bit older at the time, so she did her thing. She went off. She was like, I can't deal with this. Now, Ruth has 3 sisters, 2 of which live in the UK, and then she had 1 sister that lived in Ghana. We're gonna name Rachel. The niece we're gonna name Eve. Ruth and Eve actually had a very close-knit relationship, to the point that Eve actually used to refer to Truth's parents as mom and dad as well. Eve changed her last name to Ray's last name. They paid for her schooling. I mean, they really supported this girl. So when Eve spoke up and said, hey, I would love to donate a kidney to you, this overwhelmed Ruth with so much emotion. Initially, Ruth didn't say anything to Eve. She didn't agree. She told her let me talk to my husband, and then also let me talk to your mom, and we'll go from there. And so she spoke to her husband, and Ray initially was not with the plans. He's like, I don't know about this, but Ruth convinced him, and then eventually they spoke to Rachel, and Rachel was completely okay with the plan. And Truth said that the NHS granted Eve a medical visa to be able to leave Ghana and come to the UK in order to have the procedure done to donate her kidney over to Ruth. So Eve lands in London in 2010. She does all the touristy stuff, they do all that. Because Ray and Ruth have gone through the same process, they knew that once the tourism and all that is over, you want to get to work. So they were really close with the hair salon at the end of their road, and they had actually paid for Eve to go to hair school back in Ghana, and so she was a really good hairstylist. So they asked their friend for a favor, like, hey, can she get a part-time job? The owner was like 100%. She starts working there, and so things were seeming to go great. Initially, Eve would accompany Ruth to all of the hospital visits. She was there. Slowly but surely, though, she started making excuses, saying, oh, my body hurts, or I'm tired, whatever it is. And Ruth would be like, it's fine, you know, if you change your mind and you don't want to go through the procedure, like, please let me know. Like, there's no hard feelings, you know? But Eve never said anything. And eventually a letter arrives at the house from the organization that helped them attain the medical visas, saying, hey, our records show that the procedure hasn't been done and it doesn't look like it's going to be done by the time this visa expires, and so we're just letting you know that, you know, Eve has to go back to Ghana or she will be deported. And so the family is, you know, telling Eve, like, hey, this is the deal. We have to start preparing for you to go back to Ghana. All of a sudden, Eve's attitude changes. She starts coming home from work late. Mind you, it's a 3-minute walk from the salon. So for her to be an hour, 2 hours late, it doesn't make any sense. Now, Ruth and Ray didn't say anything at first because they were like, maybe she made friends at the salon, whatever. They didn't think anything of it. One day, Ruth is asleep and she ends up having this dream that a dog bit her specifically on her left leg. And she wakes up screaming, and there's actually a bite mark on her left leg. From that point forward, Ruth's pain in that leg only increased more and more, to the point that she just couldn't do anything. She would just lay on the living room floor, just like suffering in pain. And, you know, Harold, Truth, Ray, at the time Truth had her first son, they would all be in the living room trying to console the mom, telling her it's going to be okay. And Eve would just sit there like, just like making weird noises, not offering or seeming to be concerned at all that, you know, Ruth was in so much pain. So one day, it was time for Eve to come home from work, and she doesn't come home. Hours and hours passes by. She never shows up. Ray goes down to the hair salon, asks like 5 different times, like, where's my niece? And they're like, she left here hours ago, dude. Like, we don't know where she's at, right? So they're looking for her, no answer. They go home. Obviously, Ray and Ruth are both panicking because, you know, Eve's in their care and now she's missing. They don't know where she's gone. They can't find her. Months and months, she said about 6 or 7 months go by and they never see Eve again. One day, Truth's at home with her son and Ray's there as well. And she sees from the kitchen window that there's like a few people circling around her dad's car. And she's just like, what the hell? So before she can call her dad and be like, hey, you know, somebody's looking at your car, she hears the doorbell ring. She goes to open up the doorbell and there's police standing there and they're like, hey, is this your father's residence? And Truth is like, yes, this is it. And they're like, we need to see your father. So her father comes downstairs and they inform him that he is under arrest for grape and for human traffic school of body parts. Truth's in shock. She's scrambling for a reason why these police would be saying anything that is coming out of their mouth right now. Truth was completely distraught. They take her father away. They said something on the walkie-talkies. A car pulled up and they put her dad in the car. She immediately calls her mom, who was in dialysis at the time, and she explains to her mom everything that's happening. Her mom is like, what? What are you even talking about right now? Your father? Grape? So Truth goes, she picks up her mom from the hospital, and they go to every single police station looking for her father, looking for information. Nobody knows anything. Nobody even knows where her dad's at. At this point, her mom has been in dialysis for 4 hours. They've gone to every single police station. They can't find their dad. The mom's tired. She's like, you know what? I understand. Let's go home. So they go home. They're sitting there. They're so confused. All of a sudden, they hear the key go into the door and the door open. They see their father on the other side. He walks in and Ray looks so defeated. She said he looked so just like over everything. And when they asked him, what's wrong? What happened? What's going on? He looked at them and said, Eve accused me of grape. Truth is so confused. How could Eve do this to her parents after everything that they've done for her? At the time, Ray was working as a mental health nurse, so they demote him from being, you know, on the clinical side to being an admin. This all happened in 2011. In 2012, they tell him, hey, we have to suspend you from the job altogether until you are found not guilty. Her dad started going to multiple court hearings, one after the other, and it just started to take a massive toll on his physical, emotional, and mental health, and Truth can see it. One particular day, as Ray was going to the courthouse courthouse to go to one of his court hearings. At the front door of the courthouse, he sees no one else but Lydia standing there. And it's at that point that it hit him. This is exactly how this happened. You first try to take me down with the whole fraud thing, and now you're trying to use Eve to take me down with this grape case. And it just like made complete sense to him at this point. Truth said it was so hard though, especially being an African man. You know, they internalize a lot. They don't express their emotions, and he internalized all of this. And it shortly after that, he was diagnosed with depression. It took such a huge mental toll on him. Truth said that it killed his spirit. Of course, when everything was said and done and the investigation was finished, of course he was found innocent. Every single instance that Eve had said, this is when this happened, this is when that happened, records showed that Ray was either at work or he was picking up her mother from dialysis, and there was no possible way that what she was saying was true. So the minute that the judge saw all of this evidence, he threw the case out and said, no, this isn't true. And the judge looks at Eve and says, matter of fact, you need to go back to Ghana anyway. And at this point, Eve decides to claim insanity, and because of that, the court had to grant her a stay in the UK, and this only enraged Truth more. You tarnished my dad's reputation. You took away everything from him. You ruined his life. You ruined his job. You killed his spirit, and you get to stay in the UK? At this point, Ray was just done with London. He just needed a break. In 2015, they decide to pack up everything and go back to Ghana and just go for a vacation and just enjoy themselves. And Truth said a time was had. They had a beautiful time, but of course family drama eventually had to meet them up, right? And so at this point, they had gone to see all of her mother's family members and visited them and all of that. They were shocked that she was walking, which was really strange to the rest of the family. They're like, why are you shocked that my mom's walking? But they were like, oh, you're walking. One day, you know, her mom's cousin pulls her into the room and she's like, that's your real leg? Like, what's going on? Like, that's your real leg? And the mom's like, what are you talking about? Yes, this is my real leg. She pulls up her long skirt and shows them that it's her real legs. And so both the cousins go crazy. They're like, oh my God, oh my God. And the mom's looking at them like, what are you talking about right now? Come to find out, Lydia had told the entire family that the mom was just so sick, that Ruth lost her leg, she couldn't walk anymore. Like this random rumor. I don't know why she would start this rumor, but that's what she told the whole family. So obviously the family was shocked when they saw that Ruth was walking. But despite all of that, Truth and her family have a beautiful vacation. They enjoy themselves. They head back to London and her mom goes back to dialysis. But unfortunately, the pain in the leg only got worse to the point that other symptoms started to arise, and the doctors had no choice but to choose amputation as the course of action. The main reason the doctors chose amputation was because when she would have these huge burst of pain, it would also cause her leg to go black. And so they were like, look, this infection's only going to grow. So they amputated her leg up to her knee, right? But then after the amputation happened, the infection was still there and it was still becoming an issue. And so they went back and said, hey, we have to do a second amputation and we have to go above the knee this time. And so they were telling, you know, Ray, this is a huge risk. This is 50-50 because we just freshly amputated this area recently. So Ruth goes in for her second amputation. The family's in the hallway. Truth said you can see the color in her dad was changing, and they're just like waiting to see if their mom's okay. She comes out fine, and her dad stood by her mom's side the entire time. Through rehab, through everything, he was there to make sure that her mom adjusted to this new life of not having a leg. As the family was going through all of this, all Truth can think about was back to 2015 when they were in Ghana and everything that the family was saying about her mom having an amputated leg. She was like, that's so weird that she started that rumor and now look at my mom now. Like, what's the correlation? So as the family struggles to find a new norm, 2020 hits and we all know what happens then. They're all in the house. This time, Truth starts watching a lot of documentaries. She's just watching one after another. She started to see how short life is and how things can change. And so this actually caused her to want to reach out to Lydia's kids and to her cousins, right? Those are her first cousins. And she was just thinking like, this isn't our beef. This is our parents' beef. Like, we shouldn't take on our parents' beef. We should be able to talk, right? So she essentially reached out to them and said, hey, you know, this is wrong. We should be connected. She reached out to her boy cousin first and they spoke for a little bit. He said, yeah, I'll set up a Zoom meeting so we can all talk. To this day, she's still waiting for that Zoom meeting to happen. She reached out to her girl cousin and said the same thing. You know, they exchanged a few pleasantries, but eventually that conversation faded away as well. Once she was left on red, both by her boy and girl cousin, she just left it there, went on with life. It's 2021 now. It's a routine checkup for her mom, for her kidneys, just to make sure everything is okay. And her dad takes her. He happened to be off that day. Truth wanted to meet up with them afterwards, right? So she goes to call her dad and her dad doesn't pick up. She's like, that's weird. So she calls her mom and she's like, hey, Mom, mom, like, let me know when you guys are home. I want to come over with the kids, da-da-da-da. And Ruth is like, yeah, I'm in the car. I'm just waiting for your dad to come back and we're going to head out. And she's like, okay, cool. An hour goes by, an hour and a half goes by, and her mom's really good at like responding and stuff, so she thought it was weird. She calls her mom again, and her mom's like, I'm still in the car. Mind you, it's winter time at this point. So she's like, I'm still in the car, I'm still waiting for your dad. Her mom's like, your dad just went to the bathroom. He said he'll be right back, and he hasn't been back since. At this point, Truth is like, that's really weird, Mom. Like, what do you mean? And she's like, I'm still waiting. So she's like, let me get off this phone, let me call dad, let me figure this out. She calls her dad again, doesn't answer. So at this point, Truth is panicking a little bit. So she calls her brother Harold. Harold at this time was working about 5-10 minutes away from the hospital. And so he headed over there. He gets to his mom. His mom, sure enough, is in the car. And he's like, let me go talk to the security guard. Let me go see what's happening. Goes to the security guard. They try to find his dad. Nothing's coming up. The brother ends up calling an Uber for his mom. The keys are with the dad, so they couldn't drive the car off. The brother follows behind in his car. They get to the house. Truth arrives a little bit while later, and they're sitting in the house, and they're just trying to figure out what's going on. Like, this is not like Ray to just up and go missing. Like, he would never do that to the family, right? So they're just like sitting there, worried, and all of a sudden they hear a knock at the door. Truth opens the door, and she sees 2 officers. At this point, Truth is sick of it. She's so tired of seeing police officers at her door. She's like, what is it? And they told her the most devastating news. After confirming that this was her father's residence, they asked Truth, hey, can you ask the kids to go upstairs? Harold takes the kids upstairs, and this is when the police tell her that they have found Ray unresponsive in the hospital toilet, and this absolutely shatters their world. She's like, what are you even talking about? Ruth is sitting there like, nope. She just keeps shaking her head, saying no, saying, I won't believe it until you show me the body. I don't believe it. Ruth and Harold had to go down to the hospital and identify their father. And their father, she said when she saw her father, she couldn't even believe this strong, amazing man was now like dwindled down to this on this slab. She calls her family on her father's side. She informs them what happened. They're devastated. Truth tells us on the drive home from the hospital, it took everything in her to not pull up to Lydia's house and give her everything that she deserved. Let them know like what she did to her parents, how she killed their spirits, how she harassed them, how she wanted to just rip her to shreds. No one could tell Truth that her father did not pass away from just all the things that he had been through, all the things he had to persevere through. The week of her father's passing, she's going through paperwork, just getting everything kind of settled in, and she started to find all the paperworks of everything that her parents had told her stories of, like all the times that they had gone to prison and all the things that they had endured. She started to see all of the actual paperwork of all of these things. This enraged Truth. She picks up her phone, she messages her boy and girl cousin, and she's just like, I'm disappointed in you. I'm disappointed that you took on this beef, that you're refusing to meet me, my brother, just all of that, The girl cousin responds back and she says, hey, I see that you sent me a message, but I can't see it. This is just something that you and my brother are gonna have to sort out because he's the one that initiated the whole Zoom conversation thing. The boy cousin never responded. Truth said there's a Ghanaian tradition called 1 week, and it's something that happens when a family member passes away. So they were having that at the house, and everyone's there. They're consoling the mother, the family, and there's a knock on the door. Truth's not the one that opened the door, but somebody else did, and on the other side of the door was Lydia. And she had to walk through this little corridor, and when she got into the living room, everybody's head turned and looked at her, and they were shocked that she was there. She doesn't say anything. She sits on the couch opposite of Ruth's wheelchair, and she doesn't say anything. Ruth doesn't say anything. She just bursts out crying. Everyone's trying to console Ruth, and Lydia is just sitting there making noises. 25 minutes later, Lydia gets up. She tells Ruth she's leaving, and she just leaves. Truth really believes that Lydia only showed up to confirm the father was actually dead. Lydia didn't even have the decency to wear all black. In February, they held her father's funeral, and the funeral home was lovely. They, agreed to let the mother do whatever she wanted and to say goodbye to her husband in the way that she wanted to. She shared a photo with us of her mom saying goodbye to her husband. It was so sad. And the entire time, all Truth was thinking about was all the promises and memories that, her parents were planning on making, and their retirement goals and all these things that they had promised each other, and now all of that was just kind of over with, it just ended. She said her father had a beautiful funeral. I want to include a picture of her father's grave. It is a beautiful grave, very fitting for the man that he was. And shortly after that, they tried to go back to normal life, figure out what that looks like without their father there, without Ray being there, without her husband. It was just a really hard time for her family. Her mom's health shortly after that started declining at a rapid rate, to the point that she went from being wheelchair bound to being bed bound. Her mom started experiencing pain in her arms along with her sight going, and she started having pain in her hands, and she couldn't sit up, so she was just always laying on her back. It got to the point that adult social services had to get involved along with other health workers and decide that her mom needed 24-hour care. They hired help for her, and she had someone in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, someone transporting her to dialysis. Ruth's friends were also there to help her with everything that she needed as well. Shortly after this, her mom ended up suffering from a very severe back infection because she's always laying on her back. You could only imagine the bed sores that were starting to be created. And so social services stepped in again and decided that it was actually best for her to go to a specialized home. Ruth was really starting to lose hope. Once her mom was put into the home, she would always have to be in these meetings at the facility and checking on our mom, and they would show her photos and tell her, like, you know, the status of her mom's situation. During all these meetings, though, all Ruth can think about was everything that her mom and dad had to endure, everything that they were put through. That's all that was like running through her head. Ruth was in the facility for about 6 months. It was a normal day, and they were going to give her dialysis, and for some reason her blood pressure was through the roof. It caused her to become unconscious. Harold and Ruth were just waiting and hoping that their mother pulled through. Unfortunately, though, on November 9th, 2024, Ruth passed away, and both Ruth and Harold were there to witness her final breath. Within a short period of time, Ruth and Harold had to come up with the money to be able to, you know, have a service for their mom, and so she created a GoFundMe page to be able to raise some funds, and she posted it on her Instagram story. And it was so odd to see her girl cousin watching her Instagram stories, not sending condolences, nothing. And it just enraged her more, like the depths they were taking this rivalry to. Ultimately, this is why Ruth wanted to share this story, is to show the, you know, the depths of like rivalries and sibling battles, and why it's not necessary, and life is too short, and why would you even do something like that? She wanted to spread her parents' story and not allow her parents' name to go in vain. Now, Ruth did tell us that she has a book on the way, and that she wrote in great details everything that her parents went through, from what was going on in Ghana in the 80s to them moving to London and everything in between. And she, you know, is working on getting that edited and published now, and she's just so overwhelmed with all the support. I'm wishing her children, her brother, her loved ones, nothing but the best. I pray that you find happiness, healing. I sent her like the longest message after I watched the story because it broke me. The evil in this world makes me so mad. I want you guys to send her so much love, so much encouragement, so much life. I told her she might not have first cousins, but she for sure has a lot of internet cousins now. I appreciate you guys for tagging me in this. I wanted to make sure I got it out to you guys. I hope you have a beautiful day. Bye.